Good day. Since the tumultuous events of the previous week, the extraordinary interview Joe Biden gave to George Stephanopoulos, in which he referred to President Putin of Russia as a killer, provoking the Russians to recall their ambassador for consultations, the disastrous summit between the United States and China in Anchorage, disastrous that is for the United States, and the, by contrast, extremely warm visit to China of Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov. Since those events, the pieces on the great chessboard have continued to move. Firstly, we've had news of Russian Foreign Minister Lavrov's visit to South Korea, where he has had intense discussions with the South Korean leadership. This has happened in parallel to an exchange of greetings between Chinese President Xi Jinping and North Korean leader Kim Jong-un on the anniversary of the two countries' friendship treaty. I should say that the Russians have exceptionally friendly relations with South Korea, and Lavrov's visit will have partly been about developing those relations, particularly in the economic sphere. However, there is no doubt that Lavrov will have discussed with the South Koreans progress towards a Korean settlement, with the Chinese also giving their ally in North Korea a nudge in that direction. But in a sense, Lavrov's visit to Korea is not exactly perhaps a sideshow, but part of normal international relations. The big moves have been made by China, specifically by Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi. Wang Yi has been on a tour of important Central Asia states, and the first important country that he visited was Iran, where he has signed a treaty with Iran, with Iranian Foreign Minister Zaev, for what the Chinese call a strategic partnership. We don't know the exact terms of the treaty, and I think this is important to say because there have been some very, very wild speculations about its contents, about China investing $400 billion in the Iranian economy and such things. All of that may be true, but we don't yet know the details because the treaty itself has not yet been published. This is what China's semi-official newspaper, Global Times, says about this. China has signed a 25-year agreement with Iran to enhance comprehensive cooperation, which, however, was interpreted by some Western media from a geopolitical competition perspective, claiming that China would invest $400 billion in Iran, and the two countries sought to make the agreement a game changer for their bilateral cooperation amid US sanctions on Iran. As no details of the agreement have been officially released, these reports are a unilateral interpretation by Western media that intends to portray the normally deepening bilateral cooperation between China and Iran as a challenge against the US, exaggerate Iran's threat amid the deadlock of the nuclear issue, and drive a wedge between Iran and other countries in the region. Unlike the Western addiction to instigating geopolitical competition among Middle East countries, China is committed to a greater engagement in efforts to address the region's security issues, either through participation in existing mechanisms or the push for new platforms, such as a multilateral dialogue platform for the Persian Gulf region, regional affairs, etc. Now, I think to a great extent what Global Times says is actually true. Firstly, despite the denials, I think that the claim that China intends to invest very heavily in Iran, perhaps $400 billion, perhaps over 25 years, much more than that, is almost certainly true. Iran is a major oil producer. It is a sophisticated country in many respects. It is also a country which is important to China's Belt and Road Initiative. It is an important part of the Central Asian architecture, and it is a country with which China, by the way, has had extremely long historic relations. It is entirely understandable that the Chinese would want to develop a close relationship with Iran, a country with which historically they have had close and friendly relations. However, I would also add that when the Chinese say that the decision of China to agree the strategic partnership with Iran and to invest heavily in Iran is a stabilizing factor in the region, the Chinese undoubtedly are saying the truth. Briefly, Iran now has been given an economic lifeline, which will make it easier for Iran not just to withstand the current sanctions that the United States has imposed upon it, but also to start to grow its economy and to develop its society in a way that up to now it has found extremely difficult to do. That gives the Iranians a strong incentive to avoid disrupting their newfound relationship, economic relationship with China. The Iranians know that the Chinese do not want to see Iran develop nuclear weapons, and that the Chinese absolutely do not want to see a war in the Persian Gulf. They certainly do not want to see a situation where Iran finds itself in conflict with countries like Saudi Arabia and Israel, with which China also has very close and friendly relations. Given that this is so, the Iranians know that this economic lifeline China has given them is conditional upon Iran not pursuing its nuclear program to the point of acquiring nuclear weapons. The economic deal and strategic partnership between China and Iran therefore acts as a major disincentive for Iran against Iran acquiring such weapons. In that respect, undoubtedly, and in fact, just as Global Times says, it is a stabilizing, this agreement is a stabilizing factor in Middle Eastern affairs. Moreover, China is aware of the fact, and I return again to what Global Times says. Putting in perspective the good-hearted offer from China to Iran in its hour of need, observers think the China-Iran deal could prompt other countries in the region to follow, with plans to ink longer-term partnerships with China that fit their development needs as they seek to diversify the economies in the post-pandemic era, and as the Chinese government has shown more reliability and stability than the seesaw US government, whose policies concerning the region continue to swing every time it changes administration. The plan for a China-Iran comprehensive cooperation is the result of both sides' efforts after they issued a joint statement on establishing a comprehensive strategic partnership in January 2016. Under the new agreements, the two sides will tap the potentials in economic and cultural cooperation and make plans for long-term cooperation. By distorting the intention of China-Iran cooperation, the Western media is aiming to exaggerate Iran's threat and amid the deadlock of the nuclear issue in order to justify the West's sanctions on Iran. And the 25-year strategic deal, an indication of pragmatic cooperation between China and Iran, is not confined to the two countries, as it symbolizes China's approach to diffuse geopolitical tensions in the Middle East. And China staunchly supports Saudi Arabia's efforts to explore and find a path of development that fits its own conditions. China's Foreign Minister Wang Yi, visiting Saudi Arabia in a meeting with the Saudi Arabia's Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman, said that the Chinese diplomat emphasized that the two sides can give full play to the role of the China-Saudi Arabia high-level joint committee, which should take the lead in deepening bilateral cooperations in traditional areas such as trade, investment, and infrastructure, as well as emerging fields including artificial intelligence, 5G, big data, and aerospace technologies. So what the Chinese are saying and are signaling to the region, and what Wang Yi will have told MBS Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman when he visited Saudi Arabia, is that this deal between China and Iran, far from being a challenge or a threat to Iran, is a stabilizing factor, just as I said, because it does not lead, it disincentivizes Iran from falling back on its plan to develop nuclear weapons. In addition, Wang Yi obviously held out to Saudi Arabia the bait of deeper economic relations between Saudi Arabia and China. He will have told MBS that China is prepared to deal with Saudi Arabia along similar lines to the way it deals with Iran. Bearing in mind that China is already one of Saudi Arabia's principal customers for Saudi oil, it is highly likely that Wang Yi will have received a receptive audience from MBS. Now, does that mean that there is no military dimension to this agreement between China and Iran? The answer is, of course not, but it's important to stress that it will not have been a topic that Wang Yi and Iranian Foreign Minister Zaev will have discussed with each other. Almost certainly, military cooperation will be taking place, but it will be undertaken not by China directly, but by the other member of the Grand Strategic Partnership, which is Russia. The Russians have already supplied Iran with S-300 surface-to-air missiles and indeed other air defense systems, and there have been long-running discussions between the Russians and the Iranians for Russia to supply Iran with fighter aircraft. In fact, I understand that the Russians some time ago actually offered Iran MiG-29 fighter jets, which Iran, however, rejected as it held out for more advanced and longer ranged Su-30 fighters, which Russia at the moment was not prepared to supply. I think in time those issues will be resolved and we will be seeing more Russian-Iranian defense agreements on the back of this deal. This, in fact, this arrangement in which the Chinese deal with the economic issues and the Russians deal with the security and defense related issues is becoming an increasing feature of the Russian-Chinese strategic partnership. More about that shortly. Iran and Saudi Arabia are not the only two countries that Wang Yi visited. He has also visited Turkey, where he has had meetings with President Erdogan and where he will have discussed with President Erdogan of Turkey China's wish to involve Turkey in the Belt and Road initiative, something which Erdogan has been extremely open to, and where there might have been discussions between China and Turkey about China assisting Turkey through its current economic problems. One other topic almost certainly will have been discussed, and that is the issue of Xinjiang and the problems, China's problems with the Uyghurs. Unlike the Western powers, Turkey has been extremely reticent on the topic of the Uyghurs, as, by the way, has Saudi Arabia been. Despite the fact that the Uyghurs are Turkish-speaking and Muslim, and despite the fact that Erdogan has set himself up as the great defender of Turkic-speaking peoples and as a leader in the Sunni Muslim world, Turkey has consistently shown a reluctance to involve itself in Xinjiang so as not to antagonize its great new partner, China. Saudi Arabia, despite also claiming de facto leadership of the Sunni Muslim world, has taken the same position. I have heard in Britain some anger and exasperation expressed by British officials about the refusal of Muslim countries to join the anti-Chinese campaign which the West is currently conducting on the subject of the Uyghurs and Xinjiang. That, however, is the reality, irrespective of what is actually happening in Xinjiang province, about which I am very uninformed. The fact is that for countries like Iran, Saudi Arabia, and Turkey, relations with China matter far more than the issue of Xinjiang does. I want to return briefly, before I finish this topic of discussion, to the question of China's relationship with Russia and the respective role that each of these two countries has with the other. There's been much misunderstanding about the nature of this relationship, and of course there are still continuous denials, both from the Chinese and the Russians, about whether or not what the Chinese and the Russians do, the arrangement they have with each other, actually amounts to an alliance or is something less than that. I have no doubt at all that whether you choose to call it an alliance or not, it is that in all but name, and the two sides have now formally admitted that they coordinate their foreign policy moves with each other. The Russians, therefore, will have been fully briefed by the Chinese about their trips, about Wang Yi's visits to Iran, Saudi Arabia, and Turkey, and about the attempts by China to develop economic relationships, not just with Iran, but with Saudi Arabia and ultimately with Turkey also, as a way of consolidating the Eurasian partnerships, that's to say China's and Russia's position, economic and in security terms, in Central Asia, amongst the Central Asian states. However, I think it goes beyond this, and I'm going to now discuss something that I wrote way back in July 2016 in an article for the Duran, in which I actually wrote about the fact that the relationship between China and Russia was indeed evolving into something which is essentially an alliance. Here is what I said. In all essentials, this is an extremely close alliance between two great powers. It is sometimes said that because it is not underpinned by ideology, but rests purely on self-interest, that somehow makes it brittle. My own view, on the contrary, is the fact that the alliance is based purely on self-interest and not on ideology or sentiment, so that the two allies have no illusions about each other, makes it deeper and stronger. The alliance does have, however, one special feature which in the modern world makes it unique. Most countries, when they forge alliances with other countries, go out of their way to publicize the fact. By contrast, the reason why the alliance between Russia and China is not widely recognized for what it is because of the extraordinary lengths to which both great powers go to deny the fact of its existence. The reason for this is not difficult to see. Alliances tend to get defined by their enemies. The Russian-Chinese alliance is clearly pitted against the other great alliance system of the modern world, that of the US and its allies. Both the Russians and the Chinese, however, want to maintain, at least for the moment, the fiction that they and the US and its allies are not enemies or even adversaries, but are partners. Remember, that was written in 2016. Things have changed in relation to that a lot since then. Anyway, I continue. Though with the crises in Ukraine and the South China Sea, this fiction is becoming increasingly difficult to sustain, it remains important to both the Russians and the Chinese to preserve it so that they can maintain a political dialogue, not just with the US, but also with the US's allies, especially Germany and Japan, as well as a place in the international institutions, such as the World Bank and the IMF, which have been historically dominated by the US. It is precisely for this reason that neocon hardliners in the US, who want to preserve the US's geostrategic dominance, want, on the contrary, to tear down all pretenses and to define Russia and China openly and clearly as the US's enemies. Again, I reiterate, I wrote all of that in 2016. That way, they hope to reimpose tighter bloc discipline within the Western alliance and end any prospect of US allies becoming involved in Russian and Chinese projects like China's Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank or the Russian-Chinese Greater Eurasia and Silk Road projects. They also hope that way to minimize or even exclude Russian and Chinese influence from US-dominated international institutions like the IMF and the World Bank. Of course, defining China as a US enemy also plays into the hands of protectionists in the US who would like to use that as an excuse to close the US market to Chinese goods. Beyond the very complex relations Russia and China have with the West, which for the moment it is in their interest to keep complex, the Russians and the Chinese also have to consider the effect the public acknowledgement of their alliance would have on third powers such as India, Pakistan, Vietnam, Saudi Arabia, South Korea, and Iran, which have had a history of conflicts with either Russia or China. By concealing the fact of their alliance, the Russians and the Chinese can each preserve their historic relations with old friends, in Russia's case with India, South Korea, and Vietnam, in China's case with Pakistan, Saudi Arabia, and Iran, which might otherwise become alarmed at the public announcement that a country they had always assumed was a friend had now formally become an ally of a former foe with whom they might still have a prickly relationship. So there we are. That is why the Chinese and the Russians conceal the fact of their alliance. It keeps the US and its allies off balance, unable to sort out and decide for themselves to what extent exactly the Russians and the Chinese are working alongside each other, and it enables China and Russia to pursue diplomatic strategies with countries which might be wary of getting too close if the Russians and the Chinese were to simply announce that they were allies. That makes it possible for Lavrov of Russia to visit South Korea and have friendly dealings and discussions with the South Koreans there, and it enables Wang Yi of China to visit Saudi Arabia, Iran, and Turkey, and to do big deals, especially in Iran, without provoking too strong a reaction from other countries in the region. I would add something else, which is perhaps important to the nature and operations of this alliance, and I just want to discuss briefly what that is, again with reference to that article which I wrote way back in 2016. It is also partly to conceal the fact of their alliance that the Russians and the Chinese have weaved a complex web of organizations around their alliance, of which the Shanghai Cooperation Organization and the BRICS are just two. Such organizations enable the Russians and the Chinese to create institutions like the BRICS Bank or the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank as multilateral ventures which are not targeted at the West, as it would not be possible for them to do if they were openly allied with each other. These organizations also enable the Russians and the Chinese to engage countries like Brazil, India, Iran, and Pakistan in a friendly way, treating them as equal partners as they seek to extend their influence, the influence of their alliance, into places like Southern Africa and Latin America, where it might not otherwise reach. So there again, we see this in operation once more. The Chinese come to Central Asia, to Iran, Turkey, and Saudi Arabia, offering massive regional cooperation, and they do so not as part of some great alliance pitted against the West, which it might be difficult for countries which are still nominally US allies, like Saudi Arabia and Turkey, to sign up to, but as an independent actor offering good and stabilizing deals. At the same time, the Russians are free to pursue military cooperation with Iran, thereby securing Iran's position from potential outside attack. The Chinese, of course, know that. From their point of view, they're happy to see the Russians become involved in developing Iran's security architecture, making Iran less likely to be attacked by Israel and the West, a fact which obviously China does not want to see happen, because a war in which Iran is involved is going to put at risk China's huge pending investments in Iran. It's a partnership in which, by denying the fact of their alliance, China and Russia are each able to play to their respective strengths. I'm going to finish with the last words from that article which I wrote back in 2016, which I think can summarize in more fully all of the points that I've made in this video, and which do so in a way that remains up to date. It is a common trope that the world today is moving from a unipolar world dominated by one superpower, the United States, towards a multipolar world where there will be a more complex interchange between rival centers of power. Whilst with the rise of India, I think that is basically true. I do not think the terms unipolar or multipolar properly describe the world as it is now. Rather, I think the world today is basically bipolar, just as it was during the Cold War, with two great international alliances facing off against each other, just as they did then. Whereas during the Cold War, it was the US and the Western Alliance which faced off against the USSR and its Warsaw Pact allies. Today it is the US and the Western Alliance versus the Eurasian Alliance that has crystallized around Russia and China, which also includes certain Central Asian states that were formerly part of the USSR, and which may shortly also include Iran. That the duel between these two great alliances, unlike the Cold War, is being conducted mainly in the shadows and without the ideological dimension that marked the Cold War, does not mean it is any less real. On the contrary, it is not only real, but it is taking place all the time, and as it is happening, it is reshaping our world. Thank you for joining me for this video today. I look forward to you joining me for future programs, both on this channel and in my other channel, the one that I have with my colleague and friend Alex Christoforou at the Duran. Please also check out Alex's channel, which you will find a link to under this video, and also our other channel where we publish our live interactions with our viewers on our live streams. Please also check us out on our other platforms, BitChute, Library, Rumble, and especially Odyssey. And please also support us to the extent you feel able through PayPal, Patreon, and Subscribestar. Please note that we accept donations in Bitcoin, if you can, or other such currencies. Also, please check out our Discord server, and last but not least, check out our shop. The wonderful things you will find there, our amazing magic mugs, our superb t-shirts, long-sleeved and short-sleeved, our hats, our hoodies, and our sweatshirts. You will find links under this video. Please also remember to check your subscription both to this channel and to all our others, and I look forward to you joining me in my next program. Thank you for joining me today, and have a wonderful day.